Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air shift, without anyone saying a word, not because someone yelled, not because there was conflict, but because someone was simply silent? They didn't explain, they didn't defend, they didn't engage, they just disappeared from the noise, and somehow that silence screamed louder than anything. What if you were that person? What if, instead of over-explaining every emotion, you just breathed? Instead of answering every accusation, you just stared. Instead of giving every ounce of your soul, you stepped back without guilt. If that thought scares you, you've already given too much of yourself to people who never earned your energy. Because here's a truth we rarely admit: the more available you are, the less you're valued. And the day you stop being reactive is the day you start becoming untouchable. There's a reason you're still here listening. In the quiet, thank you for being here. And I hope you'll stay until the end, because what's coming next might be the moment everything changes. Alina walked into the room like she had 100 times before. But something was different. She didn't smile, she didn't wave, she didn't apologize for being late or try to fill the silence. She just sat down and let the quiet settle. And yet, the entire room shifted. People turned. Brows furrowed. Someone cleared their throat just to break the tension. But Alina said nothing. And that silence, that simple refusal to engage, suddenly felt louder than the most furious scream. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't passive aggressiveness. It was presence. And no one knew what to do with it, because they were used to her smile, her willingness to jump in, to smooth things over, to react, to absorb. They were used to her being emotionally available. So when that availability vanished, even for a moment, the entire dynamic collapsed. Have you ever felt that too? That shift when you finally stop playing the role others expect, when your silence threatens their sense of control. Because that's what this is really about: control. People don't panic when you speak. They panic when you stop responding the way they've trained you to. Alina didn't know this at first. She thought she was just tired, too drained to keep pretending. But the more she withdrew, the more she watched how people reacted, and the more she realized it wasn't her silence they feared. It was what her silence revealed. You see, when you stop being predictable, you become powerful, not because you're trying to manipulate, but because you're no longer available for manipulation. You're no longer the vending machine of emotional comfort. You're no longer the buffer for their chaos. You are something else now, something unmanageable, uncategorized, and that terrifies them. Alina's journey didn't begin with a declaration. It began with a choice. A small, quiet choice to no longer bleed her energy where it wasn't honored. Not everyone noticed at first, but the ones who needed her reactions the most, they noticed instantly. They poked, they pushed, they tested her silence, but she stayed grounded. And with every moment she refused to react, something extraordinary happened. Their noise got louder, but her peace grew deeper. Her power wasn't in what she said. It was in what she chose not to give. And maybe that's where your power is too, not in shouting louder, not in fixing everything, but in becoming the stillness that no one can bend. So before we go deeper, ask yourself this: what would happen if you stopped being emotionally available to those who only show up to drain you? What would happen if you allowed your silence to speak for you? Alina did, and everything changed. But that was just the beginning, because the moment you stop reacting is the moment they start revealing themselves. And what comes next might just shake everything you thought you understood about connection. They didn't know what to do with her silence, so they turned it into something else. They called her cold, distant, uncaring, detached, as if her silence was a weapon instead of a boundary. But the truth: they weren't mad because she was silent. They were mad because she stopped playing the game. For years, Alina had responded to every sigh, every shift in tone, every "are you okay?" That wasn't really a question, but an invitation to dance in the cycle of emotional caretaking. She always said yes, always leaned in, always absorbed, but now she didn't. And that silence, it wasn't passive, it was power. You know what happened next? They started to unravel, not because she hurt them, But because her stillness exposed the instability they'd hidden behind her reactions, you think silence is just absence. It's not. Silence is like a mirror. And when you hold it up, people have to look. And some can't, some lash out, some accuse you, some beg you to come back, not because they miss you, but because they miss the version of themselves you made tolerable. They say you've changed. They say you're being selfish. But what they really mean is, you're no longer useful. You no longer play your part in the emotional script. And that's terrifying for them, because most people don't want truth. They want comfort, even if that comfort costs you your peace. But Alina, she chose truth. The truth that no one should have to explain their peace. The truth that not every cry deserves a response. The truth that silence is not abandonment, it's sovereignty. And it wasn't easy. She felt the sting of being misunderstood, the ache of watching people walk away, the burn of guilt trying to pull her back, but she stayed still. She breathed. She listened, not to their words, but to her own boundaries. And slowly, the guilt began to fade, the noise began to dim, and something unexpected began to rise: self-respect, not the kind that needs applause, but the kind that stands quiet and unshaken, even when the world shouts. If you've ever felt like your silence made people uncomfortable, if you've ever been accused of being too much or too distant just because you stopped being endlessly available, you're not alone. You're not wrong. You're just awakening. So I'll ask you gently, have you ever watched someone spiral just because you didn't give them the reaction they wanted? And if you have, what did that tell you? Because sometimes the way they react to your silence reveals everything they've been hiding in your noise. And maybe that's where your clarity begins. If you felt this in your own life, if silence has ever taught you more than 1,000 words could, drop a whisper below. I choose peace. Let the old roles fall away. Let the silence speak. Because next, we'll unravel the real reason you feel so drained, and it has nothing to do with your schedule. Alina didn't understand why she was always exhausted. She thought it was work, maybe her diet, maybe she just wasn't sleeping well. But no matter how much she rested, she still woke up tired, not just physically, but in a way that felt bone deep, a kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Because it wasn't about her body. It was about her boundaries. She was tired from being emotionally available to everyone, always replying, always explaining, always managing the moods of people who never once asked how she was doing. And it hit her one night, as she stared at the ceiling after yet another text from someone who just needed her energy. She wasn't tired from doing too much. She was tired from doing too much for people who gave her nothing in return. Alina had become what many of us become without realizing, an emotional vending machine. You push a button, get a response. Push another, get comfort. Press again, get validation. But what happens when the machine runs out? When you've given every word, every ounce, every yes just to keep the peace? They don't thank you. They shake the machine harder. They demand more. And if you don't respond fast enough, they say you've changed. But here's the truth Alina came to understand. They weren't angry because she changed. They were angry because she stopped giving herself away for free. Because for years, she equated kindness with overfunctioning. She thought love meant self-sacrifice. She believed presence equaled value. And where did that leave her? Depleted, invisible, useful, but never truly seen. Does that feel familiar? Like you keep giving to prove you're worth keeping? You show up when you're exhausted. You say yes when you want to scream no. You explain your silence like it's a crime. And slowly you vanish, not all at once, but piece by piece, until one day you don't recognize yourself anymore, because you've become a version of you that only exists for others. Alina realized this one morning sitting on her bathroom floor, phone in hand with 10 unread messages blinking back at her, each one a request, a favor, a story, a wait. And none of them were checking in on her. That's when she whispered a sentence that would change everything. I don't owe anyone my exhaustion. It felt strange at first, wrong even, because for so long she believed exhaustion meant she was doing something right. That burnout was a badge of honor, that being needed was being loved. But no more. From that day on, Alina started measuring her worth not by how quickly she replied, but by how deeply she rested. Not by how many people she saved, but by how often she saved herself. She didn't stop being kind. She stopped being accessible. She didn't stop caring. She stopped overgiving. And in that space something new was born, not a new identity, but a return to the self she had abandoned somewhere between people-pleasing and fear of being forgotten. So now I ask you, what part of yourself have you abandoned in the name of being useful? And what would happen if you gave that part permission to return? Just sit with that and breathe. Because once you understand where your energy is leaking, you'll finally understand why you've been running on empty while the world keeps demanding more. And maybe, just maybe, you'll stop blaming yourself for being tired and start protecting your energy like your life depends on it. Because it does. It started with a question Alina couldn't shake. Why do I feel guilty for doing nothing wrong? Why do I feel selfish for resting? Why do I feel anxious when someone pulls away, even when I know I didn't do anything? And then she stumbled upon something that didn't just give her answers, it gave her language, projection. Carl Jung described it as the act of taking something we cannot face within ourselves and throwing it onto someone else. And suddenly, Alina saw it everywhere. The friend who called her distant the moment she stopped fixing their problems. The partner who accused her of being uncaring when she asked for space. The colleague who labeled her arrogant just because she said no. None of them were seeing her. They were seeing their own wounds, reflected in her boundaries. Because when you stop absorbing other people's chaos, they're forced to face their own. And most people don't want that. They'd rather blame you than meet their shadow. Alina realized she had been wearing other people's shame like it was her skin. Every guilt trip she internalized, every cold shoulder she tried to warm, every withdrawal she interpreted as a sign she'd done something wrong. It was never hers to carry, but she carried it anyway. Why? Because somewhere along the way she was taught that love means bending, that closeness means compliance, that being needed is the same as being wanted. And those lies became her script, until she stopped reading it. She stopped apologizing for silence. She stopped explaining her distance. She stopped translating her boundaries into softer language just to make others comfortable. And that's when the shift happened. Not in them, in her. Because when you finally stop performing, you stop attracting audiences who only came for the show. You stop being the screen they project onto, and you become the mirror they can't look into. Some leave, some attack, some try to guilt you back into the role you abandoned. But the ones who stay, they stay because they see you, not who you used to be, not who you were trained to be, but who you are now, unguarded and unbending. Alina didn't lose everyone when she embraced her boundaries. She lost the ones who were never really with her, only with the version of her that made them feel safe. That's not a loss. That's clarity. So if you've ever felt guilt for protecting your peace, ask yourself, whose story are you living in? And what would happen if you stopped playing the villain in someone else's projection and started being the hero in your own truth? You don't owe anyone your emotional availability. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your healing. Your silence doesn't need to be justified. It needs to be honored. So let me ask you softly. Have you ever watched people pull away the moment you stopped giving more than you had, and did you notice how your peace exposed their chaos? If this touches something in you, leave a quiet echo below. I'm done apologizing for protecting my energy. Say it for you. Say it for the part of you that never got permission to rest. Because in the next breath, we're going to explore why this exhaustion runs deeper than you think, and how to finally stop bleeding power into conversations that were never meant to hold your truth. The first time Alina truly walked away, it wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, no argument, no slammed doors, just a quiet moment when she realized staying meant betraying herself. So she left, not physically, emotionally. She didn't respond, didn't explain, didn't return to justify her peace. And the collapse began. It wasn't immediate, but it was loud. The phone rang more, messages piled up, not with care, but with questions. Why are you being like this? Did I do something wrong? You're acting strange. But Alina wasn't acting, she was awakening. And the people who depended on her to carry the emotional load, they panicked. Because when she stopped showing up to play her old role, the script fell apart. That's the thing no one tells you. You don't have to shout to create impact. You don't have to fight to change the story. Sometimes, the most powerful shift comes when you simply stop participating. And that's exactly what Alina did. She stopped being the mediator, stopped being the fixer, stopped being the predictable source of comfort. And those who relied on her for balance lost theirs, not because she hurt them, but because she was no longer available to be used as emotional scaffolding. And the moment that foundation disappeared, they crumbled. You'd think it would be freeing. And in many ways it was, but it also hurt. Because walking away from dysfunction doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop feeding. Alina cried in silence. She doubted herself. She questioned whether she was being too harsh, too distant, too cold. But every time she went back to the version of herself that bled to keep others warm, she lost pieces she couldn't afford to keep losing. So this time she stayed gone. And slowly something changed. The noise faded. The guilt softened. The space around her stopped feeling lonely and started feeling sacred. Because when you're no longer tethered to people who only show up when you're convenient, you begin to meet yourself in a new way. You begin to feel whole. Not perfect, not unbothered, but grounded. Alina stopped mistaking chaos for connection, stopped mistaking crisis for intimacy, stopped mistaking attention for love. And in that clearing she found truth. She hadn't lost anything, she had finally made room. So now I ask you, what might fall apart the moment you stop overfunctioning, and are you willing to let it collapse so something real can rise? Because the people who love you for your peace, not your usefulness, they won't need you to explain your silence. They'll sit with it, honor it, maybe even learn from it. And those who can't, let them go. Their spiral is not your responsibility. Their collapse is not your cue to return. Their discomfort is not your call to soften. You're not abandoning them. You're just refusing to abandon yourself. And that difference is everything. So take a breath. Let the collapse happen. Because the next part of this journey isn't about who leaves, it's about what energy you've been leaking without even knowing it. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix, the kind that doesn't come from your body but from your soul. Alina knew that fatigue well. She'd rest, she'd cancel plans, she'd sleep in, she'd take a break. But the heaviness remained, that quiet weight she couldn't name, until she found the language for it: psychic energy. Carl Jung called it the life force of the mind. Your thoughts, emotions, focus, and attention, not infinite, not automatic, but deeply, deeply finite. And once Alina saw it through that lens, everything made sense. Every pointless argument, every defensive text, every replayed conversation at 2 a.m. They weren't just draining her time, they were bleeding her energy. Imagine this. Your mind is a battery. Every thought you give power to, every response you type, every emotional spiral you enter, it's like leaving apps running in the background. Do it long enough. And even if the screen looks calm, you're dying on the inside. That's what Alina was living, not because she was weak, but because she never learned how to protect her psychic field. She thought every message deserved a reply. Every mood swing deserved understanding. Every withdrawal required chasing. She was reacting out of habit, not choice. And here's the trick: the world doesn't need to overpower you. It just needs to trigger what's already unhealed in you. And you'll respond every time out of guilt, out of fear, out of old stories that whisper, if you don't fix this, they'll leave. But fixing isn't your job. Healing is. Protecting your energy is. Because no one else will. People will take, and take, and take, until you either collapse or decide to close the gates. Alina chose to close them, not with anger, but with awareness. She started observing her reactions like an outsider. Why did she feel the need to explain? Why did she flinch when someone was disappointed? Why did "I'm busy" feel like a betrayal? And the answer, again and again, was because she was bleeding psychic energy into wounds that weren't hers to heal. She didn't need to be more available, she needed to be more aligned, not to others' needs, but to her own peace. So she pulled back, paused, sat with her discomfort instead of silencing it with overfunctioning. And slowly, the fatigue began to lift, not because her life got easier, but because her focus got sharper. No more useless battles, no more over-explaining, no more spending the day preparing answers for questions that were never asked with love. She realized her power wasn't in reacting quickly, but in choosing wisely. And that choice changed everything. So if you've been tired in a way that rest doesn't cure, ask yourself this. Where are you leaking energy in the name of being liked? Where are you sacrificing clarity just to avoid being called cold? And who taught you that your peace was less important than someone else's approval? Because if your mind is a battery, then your boundaries are the charger. And until you plug back in, you'll keep walking through life half alive, half heard, half healed. But you don't have to. You can choose differently today. Close the tab, don't respond, let the call go to voicemail, and sit with yourself, not to escape but to reconnect. Because the next phase of this journey isn't about defense, it's about strategy. It's not about staying quiet to disappear, but to become the one thing they never expected: unreachable by chaos, untouchable by guilt, unshakable in silence. And that silence is what we're stepping into next. At first, Alina thought silence was just retreat. She used it to escape, to pause, to breathe. But eventually she discovered something deeper. Silence wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of power, not the kind of power that dominates, but the kind that disturbs, the kind that makes people uncomfortable, not because it's cruel, but because it cannot be controlled. Alina began practicing what she now calls strategic silence, silence that isn't passive. It's precise, chosen, intelligent. She stopped responding to emotional bait, stopped justifying her absence, stopped softening the truth just to keep others close. And instead she began building boundaries with her quiet. Because every silence held meaning. It said, "I'm no longer available for manipulation. I don't owe you my explanation. Your confusion isn't my responsibility." And people noticed. They poked, they pressed. They tried to pull her back into the predictable script, but she didn't return. She didn't need to, because she realized something profound. True power doesn't chase, it chooses. It decides where energy flows and where it no longer belongs. Silence became her filter. If someone couldn't sit in the space she created, if they couldn't respect the quiet between responses, if they demanded immediate emotional access, they weren't safe, not for her healing, not for her peace, not for the woman she was becoming. And that's when the game shifted. People stopped arguing, they started adjusting. Not because she forced them, but because they felt the consequence of her calm. Silence revealed who was truly connected and who was just attached to the version of her that overfunctioned. She didn't need to convince anyone anymore. Her energy did the speaking. She walked into rooms and people felt it, a groundedness, a calm that didn't beg for space because it had already claimed it. That is the power of strategic silence. It's not withdrawal, it's discernment. It's not the absence of voice, it's the presence of clarity. And when Alina made peace her default, not reaction, not performance, not rescue, she became untouchable. You felt that moment, haven't you, when you choose not to answer, not to defend, not to explain? And the silence doesn't feel empty, it feels clean. It feels right. That's your clarity speaking. So here's what you need to remember. You don't need to raise your voice to reclaim your power. You don't need to fight to make your presence known. You just need to choose what's worth your energy and let your silence handle the rest. Not out of bitterness, not to punish, but to protect. And that's not cold, that's mastery. So now I ask you, what conversation have you been stuck in that would dissolve if you simply stopped showing up for it? What argument would lose power if you no longer reacted? And what version of you would rise if you gave her room to grow in silence? You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be clear. Let them adjust to your silence. And if they can't, let that silence carry them away. Because what comes next isn't about proving your worth anymore. It's about rebuilding your inner world in the quiet they always told you was too much. The silence was deafening at first, not outside, inside. After Alina stopped explaining, stopped reacting, stopped showing up on command, there was space. A kind of stillness she wasn't used to, no text notifications, no calls begging her to fix things, no emotional storms demanding her shelter, just quiet. And in that quiet she expected peace. But instead she felt empty. Because no one warns you that healing feels like grief. You grieve the noise you thought was love, the chaos you mistook for connection, the roles you played to feel needed. And beneath all of that, you grieve the version of yourself who believed she had to earn her place by disappearing. Alina sat in that grief for days. Some mornings it felt like freedom. Others, it felt like a funeral. Because that's what sacred solitude does. It strips away the distractions. It takes away the noise you hid inside. And what's left is the truth. Who are you when no one's tugging at your emotions, when no one's requiring you to be useful, when you're no longer performing for acceptance? At first, Alina didn't know. She reached for her phone out of habit, not desire. She opened old conversations, not to reconnect, but to remember who she was when she was constantly needed. And it broke her, because she realized she had never truly been alone, not with herself. She had always been someone's emotional anchor, someone's therapist, someone's validation, never just Alina. So that became her new mission, not to cut people off, but to come home to herself. She started doing the small things again, walking in the morning without headphones, drinking her coffee slowly, sitting in silence without reaching for distraction. And at first it felt unbearable, but slowly it started to feel holy. The solitude that once felt like punishment became sanctuary, not because the loneliness disappeared, but because she stopped abandoning herself to avoid it. She began writing again, not for approval, but for clarity. She began asking herself questions no one had ever asked her. What do I need? What do I believe? What do I want? When no one else is watching, and the answers surprised her. Because underneath the overfunctioning, underneath the guilt, underneath the people-pleasing, was a woman who didn't need noise to feel alive. She just needed space. And now that she had it, she wasn't rushing to fill it. Alina began rebuilding her sense of self, not from reactions but from reflection, not from what others projected onto her, but from what had always been true within her. She stopped asking, "Do they still need me?" and started asking, "Do I still need this version of me?" And most days the answer was no, not because she didn't love people, but because she finally loved herself enough to stop leaking for them. So if you're in that lonely space right now, where silence feels heavy, where solitude feels like punishment, stay. Don't run, don't numb, don't go back just to feel useful again, because what you're feeling isn't the end, it's the beginning. And the part of you that's been buried beneath everyone else's needs is finally returning. Let her rise, let her rebuild, let her remember. Because the peace you've been searching for was never out there. It's been waiting in the quiet right where you left it. She walked into the same room, but something was different, not the people, not the lighting, not the conversation. It was her. Alina didn't say a word. She didn't explain her presence, didn't soften her energy to make others feel comfortable. And still, everyone noticed, not because she was louder, but because she was clearer. There's a shift that happens when you reclaim your energy. Your silence becomes a statement. Your stillness becomes magnetic. Your boundaries speak louder than your words ever could. Alina used to walk into that room wondering if she'd be accepted, if her presence was too much or not enough, if she needed to earn her place again. But now she didn't wonder. She knew, not because they changed, but because she did. She was no longer leaking psychic energy into conversations that drained her. She no longer made herself small just to make others feel big. She was whole, not performing wholeness, not pretending confidence. She was simply whole. And people felt it. Some looked away, not because she was unkind, but because they weren't ready to face themselves without her as their mirror. Some grew quiet, sensing that the old emotional dance no longer applied. And a few, the rare few, sat beside her in silence and didn't demand a single thing. That's the reward for reclaiming your power. You stop attracting chaos and start magnetizing clarity. You stop being the emotional vending machine and start being the lighthouse. Stable, grounded, not chasing, but guiding. Alina had become the kind of presence you don't question. You respect. Not because she demanded it, but because she no longer tolerated anything less. And that's the shift waiting for you too. It doesn't come when people change, it comes when you do. When you stop begging for respect and start embodying it. When you stop chasing peace and start living from it. When you stop reacting and start choosing. And yes, some people will leave. Let them. Their absence is not your loss, it's your liberation. Because the ones who stay will not need you to bleed to feel connected. They will not fear your silence, they will honor it. And when that happens, you'll feel the shift too. You'll breathe deeper, stand taller, walk into any room without needing to explain your worth. Because it will radiate long before you ever speak. So here's your quiet reminder. You don't have to be functional to be loved. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be useful to be worthy. You just have to be whole. And the moment you decide that, the world around you starts rearranging itself, not to fit your silence, but to respect it. Because when your energy is no longer scattered, you don't have to prove anything. Your presence says enough. So now we arrive at the final question. Are you willing to be misunderstood if it means being at peace? That's what Alina had to ask herself, not once, but every day. Because peace isn't something you find. It's something you choose, and sometimes that choice costs you things you thought you needed: approval, belonging, constant connection. But here's what Alina learned. What leaves when you choose yourself was never truly yours. She stopped defending her silence, stopped negotiating her boundaries, stopped shrinking her energy just to be palatable. And in return she gained something no one could take from her: sovereignty, the kind of power that doesn't react, it doesn't argue. It doesn't beg, it simply is. That's what Jung meant by individuation, becoming whole, becoming real, no longer a mirror for others, but a reflection of your own truth. And now that truth lives in her stillness, not as a weapon, but as a home. She no longer walks into rooms wondering if she belongs. She brings her belonging with her. She no longer fears silence. She lives in it, protects it, honors it, because in that silence she finally heard herself. And what she heard wasn't weak, it wasn't cold, it wasn't selfish, it was her. And that was enough. So now it's your turn. You've listened, you've resonated, you've seen the patterns, and maybe you've seen yourself, not the reactive self, not the drained self, but the self you abandoned just to survive. And I'm here to remind you that self is still waiting, still whole, still powerful, still yours. But she won't rise in noise, she won't appear in chaos. She waits in the silence you've been avoiding. So ask yourself, are you ready to stop performing, to stop being functional, to stop being emotionally available to people who only loved your usefulness, and instead become available to yourself? Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will stay. But those who do, they will meet the real you, the grounded you, the untouchable you. And that's the version of you the world has been waiting for. So if this journey has spoken to something inside you, if it's touched the part of you that's ready to return, leave a whisper below. Just 5 words. I choose my peace. Let the world know. You're not here to be useful, you're here to be whole. And if this message found you at the right time, don't just listen. Live it. Protect your energy, guard your mind, and walk forward, silent, strong, and unshakable. Because the world doesn't need another emotional performer. It needs someone who has become untouchable. This video is a deep dive into the psychology of strategic silence, inspired by Jungian principles, emotional mastery, and energy sovereignty. If you're tired of being drained, manipulated, or misunderstood, this is the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Direct hit keywords: emotional boundaries, strategic silence, energy protection, Carl Jung, toxic people, Emotional manipulation, psychological sovereignty, healing journey. Stop overgiving hashtags 58. Emotional boundaries protect your energy. Carl Jung wisdom stop overgiving silent power self-healing emotional mastery energy sovereignty magnifying glass tilted right 3-tier keyword strategy. Tier 1. Emotional healing, boundaries. Tier 2. 3. Stop being emotionally available. Reclaim your energy, power of silence framed prompt for thumbnail image in English. Prompt for thumbnail creation. Create a dramatic 16:9 thumbnail for a YouTube video titled Stop Being Emotionally Available with a bold subtitle on the image. Your silence is power in large, dramatic font in English. The scene should feature a central female figure 30s, emotionally strong, standing calm and composed, slightly turned away from a chaotic crowd. The crowd, 4-6 people behind her expressing frustration, confusion, or desperation, showing raw, expressive facial emotions. Red-tone dramatic background symbolizing intensity and energy. Lighting focus on the central woman, symbolizing clarity, detachment, and sovereignty. Subtitle: Your silence is power in large, contrasting font, placed in a way that draws attention and remains legible. Emotional, cinematic mood. Faces must show tension and emotion. No cartoon or abstract style. Realistic and human. Style. Cinematic, emotionally intense, psychologically deep, fits self-help and emotional healing genre. Color scheme. Dominant reds with contrasting light around main character. N letter 1 EBF, U B letter 1 EA1N, MU letter 1 ED1, N min T letter 1 EA1, O letter 1 EA3 and H thumbnail U1. CH letter 1 EC9, C letter 1 EA7N, B letter 1 EA3, O min N He.